Nickelodeon!
Oh yeah, cartoons! This is one of the shows that was officially designated a Nicktoon that I didn't review for the original Nick-O-Rama. And that's because it's an anthology show. It's not so much a cartoon itself, as it is a showcase of a bunch of individual shorts that was basically Nickelodeon's answer to Cartoon Network's What a Cartoon Show. When you watch an episode of this show, you never really knew what you were going to get. The shorts were a wide array of styles and genres. You never knew what you were going to get because you could have gotten literally anything. You ever wanted to see a collaboration between Butch Hartman and Seth MacFarlane? Well, now you can! Right. This series was actually where a lot of cartoonists finally got their shots to make something more or less on their own. Like Vincent Waller, he worked on Ren and Stimpy, and you could see some references in a lot of his particular shorts. And then he would later go on to work on SpongeBob. You could see the work of a lot of prominent cartoonists in the show. As I mentioned before, there was Seth MacFarlane and Butch Hartman, there was also Rob Renzetti. Just a lot of cartoonists that really got to showcase their craft. And it looked like there weren't too many limitations here. Oh yeah, Cartoons is full of a lot of really weird ideas that you probably wouldn't be seeing in too many other cartoons. A lot of the shorts are very obviously 90s, but a lot of them also pull from classic Looney Tunes, 30s cartoons, and there's even some stuff from the future. Like, there's one episode, Microcop, which is about a police officer in the human body named Jones, which, came out years before the movie Osmosis Jones, and is not created by the same person. Yes, I did check. Today, Oh Yeah Cartoons is known as the place where a few Nicktoons got their starts. This is the first time where you'll see Chalk Zone, My Life as a Teenage Robot, and of course, most famously, The Fairly OddParents. Chalk Zone and Fairly OddParents have several episodes here, and there are some other shows that got the miniseries treatment, like Hobart and Jelly's Day. Now, because the show had a million different teams all doing their own thing, you might imagine that this could be hit and miss. And the answer is yes. Some of the episodes of Oh Yeah Cartoons are really good, that it's like almost upsetting that they didn't get a full show, while some of them are so awful that they put Bubsy in a good light. A lot of people ask me how I was going to do this particular review, and that's a question that I had to figure out as well. You know, without talking about each individual short. Because anything that I haven't already said so far in this video probably doesn't apply to every single short. So here's what I did. I went through every single episode, or at least every single one that I could find. Some of the shorts are unfortunately obscure, lost, or only exist in very butchered quality. Then I gave each episode a score, and I decided that we should do a top 10 list. That way you could see my personal picks and see what the show had to offer at its best. Now, some rules before we get started. I immediately discounted episodes that became their own show. So Fairly OddParents, Teenage Robot, and Chalk Zone won't appear on this list at all. And rule number 2, if a series has multiple episodes, such as Mina and the Count, or Jelly's Day, or Danger Dan, I'm going to count them all as one episode. They're usually roughly of the same quality anyways, so it wouldn't skew things too much, and if I didn't do this, a lot of them would take up the majority of this list, and the worst list that I'll probably do next. So, how do you get on this particular list? Well, first and foremost, your cartoon short needs to be enjoyable. Either it has to be really funny, or tell a good story, or just be interesting enough to keep my attention. You get extra points for an interesting art style or characters with a lot of charisma. And because this is a showcase series, I'm also factoring in how much I think this would make a good series. If a short is really funny, but I can't see how they do the same thing without reusing one gag, then it's probably not going to get too high in this list. Basically, I'm judging many of these as pilots more than episodes, if that makes any sense. Sound fair? Well, let's get into it with number 10.
Oh yeah, cartoons!
For number 10, I actually had a lot of different choices, and I didn't know who to give it to in the end. One of them was Ask Edward, where these two dog brothers think their mother is going to have a baby, and so they have some hijinks over an egg. Then there was Sick and Tired, which has a really good duo trying to make money dynamic, with a pretty cool art style. Sweetie Pie vs. Hubbykins is just a really funny short with some classic Looney Tunes gags. I'd recommend checking out all of those as honorable mentions. In the end, I went with Skippy Spankerton. It's about a little girl trying to enter a film for a film festival, but she has to do it before bedtime. And of course, in her imagination, the dinosaurs are alive. I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. It's what made Rugrats so great. Kids having their own little world where their toys are actually alive. I'm also really into the personalities here. Another thing that I'm just a sucker for is young kids who are super serious about their pursuits. Like a 4-year-old who really wants to make an actual big budget movie. I think that there's a lot of great potential here, especially because her actors are stubborn with what they have to do. It's funny because, you know, they're her toys. The parents are also pretty funny characters, characters. This would be higher on the list, I think, if it had more time. Maybe getting to see the toys as actual toys. We only really get to do that a couple of times throughout the short. And I'll admit that not every single joke is on point. It's got a few rough edges, but it's certainly charming, and charm can get you quite far.
Oh yeah, cartoons!
And now for the most different episode on the list. Honestly, it's so different from anything else in the entire show that I couldn't not include it, which is definitely ironic considering its unfortunately generic name. I didn't think something entitled Enchanted Adventures would be interesting, but I was certainly wrong. It takes after 80s cartoons, He-Man especially. It's most obvious in its art style, but it's also there in the basic story and setup as well. It's a classic sword and sorcery setup. A plague has been cast upon the land, and the King Zim... No, not that one. Yeah, that one. He needs the blood of a dragon.
Leaving me no choice but to send my inexperienced son Galen on this most important quest.
Well, tell me what you don't like about him. Honestly, that's part of why I like this. For a supposed hero, no one is too keen on relying on Galen to save the day. It's great. I could see the art style putting some people off, but I really did like it, and I think it worked for the battle scenes especially. It's like watching an 80s show, which did tend to have very good character designs, with 90s animation, where they didn't cut so many corners. Any classic 80s hero needs a weapon, and Galen has a special sword. This special sword can become any weapon he so chooses, or really anything he wants it to be, and it also has the ability to return to him if he so calls for it. And this is the one thing about the short that kinda made me knock it back a few points. I think that Galen's abilities are too powerful to keep this potential show interesting for too long. If the sword's ability was just to change and transform, or if he had just the ability to call it back to him, it'd be fine. But because he can do both, I can't really see too many situations where you could ramp up the tension, especially as Galen would probably become more experienced and more heroic over time. It's a tough balance that you've got to strike if you're going for a hero like this. You obviously don't want him too weak, but if you go too far in the other direction, you've really harmed yourself before you've even begun. But for a single solitary episode, I really did enjoy this.
Oh yeah, cartoons!
Disclaimer, I don't know if Butch Hartman had anything to do with this short. He's not credited anywhere, but this looks very much like Butch Hartman's character design and artwork, and he did do a lot of other work on Oh Yeah Cartoons, but it was usually credited. I'm just bringing this up so I don't get a million comments about this asking about it. So, Kid from School is about a school-aged James Bond foiling the plot of a supervillain. Right off the bat, the comparisons to Kids Next Door are really easy to find in this, but like with the Osmosis Jones thing, years before the show actually came out. And how much you like James Bond type episodes and stories will determine how much you like this one. For a parody, it's a little bit traditional, pretty on the nose.
Chocolate milk. Shaken, not stirred.
You get all of the typical moments and jokes. The only difference here is that it's in a school. And it's very hard to not be unfair to this particular short, because Kids Next Door did this years later and did it better, but you can't really hold it against this particular short for that. What holds this one back from me, again, is my worry about its potential longevity. For a 7-minute short, this premise really does work. It's a fun little parody, especially for kids who probably haven't seen James Bond movies. But I don't really know if you can get away with doing this episode after episode. As by the books as this one is. Kids Next Door, once again, is the obvious comparison. But they deviate a lot from the traditional James Bond spy show fare, and make the references far more occasional. But for what this one is, for when it came out, I really did enjoy this one. I understand that there are a lot of disclaimers on this one, and that's probably not best for a top 10 list, but what can you really do? It's not its fault that another show came later with a similar premise. But if anything, that goes to show you what a solid groundwork that this short was built on.
Oh yeah? Cartoons!
You ever watch the Bee Movie?
You like jazz?
No, not at all. You see, this is why no one likes the Bee Movie, because no one likes jazz. People like rock though, and that's why people like The Feelers. The Feelers is kinda like the Bee Movie in a very nebulous way that I forced a connection to for the sake of a joke. It stars a band of bugs who want their music to be heard in front of a human audience. All of it inspired by 80s rock. And it's really, really good music. Like, the music in this short is so good that it's the entire reason that it's on this list.
I can handle any candle. I'm a match for any match. And most flashlights I can pass right by.
Well, I come out with my thumb out in the middle of the night.
Got my eyes set on the driver who is passing on the right.
The short puts 3 songs in like 7 minutes, and all of them are really good. Like, I'd imagine if this one did become a show, it'd be up there as one of those shows with the best musical numbers. Like, it'd be alongside Phineas and Ferb in that regard. Because it's mostly music videos, there's not much of a story here, and not too much to go on besides the music itself. While the art style is pretty typical of the era, they do some cool stuff with the visuals. Like, even if the short didn't become a show, what I would have really loved is if, like, Nick had these occasional musical interludes during, like, commercial breaks. I'm sorry if I'm, like, rambling, it's just that this short does one thing really, really well, and it doesn't do much else. Bill Burnett directed this one, who is also notable for Chalk Zone, which, as I remember, also had a lot of really, really good music. The guy is very experienced with music, and if it results in more things like this, I don't have a single problem with that.
Oh yeah, cartoons.
Now, Herb is a likable short, despite its, unfortunately, very generic name. Seriously, if you're making not just a cartoon short, but really anything, you might want to give it a memorable name. This one is just called Herb. Luckily, it's a lot more interesting than its name would have you believe. It stars this creature Herb, which is usually the school's janitor, but in this episode, he gets to make the entire school lunch, and in doing so, we're treated to a lot of interesting visuals and funny scenarios. And it definitely showed promise for what could have been a setup for a very decent show, with each episode having Herb take the place of another member of the school's faculty. What really does end up driving this one home, though, is the principal. He really hates Herb. Not entirely sure why he hates Herb. At the start of the short, he seems excited to drop Herb into making the whole school lunch, or else Herb gets fired, but then from the rest of the short, he's very excited to have Herb fail. And throughout the rest of the episode, he takes delight in that idea. I don't know, it feels like there was a scene missing. But ignoring that, the principal's single-minded hatred throughout all of this thing made for a pretty interesting show. I love it when these uppity characters keep trying to go after and foil another character who isn't even aware of their existence. While the plotting could have used a bit of work, the imagination of the short really does shine. It's a nice fun ride all the way through.
Oh yeah, cartoons!
Zoe Zoo is a quirky little show with an interesting art style. I feel like I'm being a bit repetitive saying that over and over again, but hey, that's the kind of shows that are bound to stick out in an anthology series like this. Being good or bad doesn't make the show the most memorable, it's being interesting and different. Actually, speaking of that, the show's art style is very reminiscent of a lot of shows aimed at younger audiences, like Madeline and, Caillou. I understand that last one is not an endorsement, but Zoe Zoo overall gives vibes of going back to a simpler time, where a young girl can order a bunch of ocelots. The short primarily uses one joke, but it uses it very well. This young girl has a ton of different animals in her house, including very wild and dangerous ones, and her mother doesn't seem to be paying too much attention to that, and so she tries to order one ocelot, but ends up with way more than she can handle. It's cute, and I'd recommend getting used to hearing that, because many of the other top 5 on this list also run into that camp. Zoe's matter-of-fact speaking patterns are definitely not for everyone. It's another thing that reminds me of that very aimed at younger kids kind of deal.
Mother, it is true I already have many pets, and I appreciate your tolerance in this matter. But I have noticed a void in my zoo, and I do believe an ocelot would do nicely.
I could see some people finding the short funnier because of Zoe's speaking patterns, or in some people I'd imagine it's straight up ruining the short for them. It does end up slowing down the pacing quite a bit, but I do think that that's what this one is going for. It's a lot more constrained as a result, and I think that helps it stand out. Remember, Oh Yeah Cartoons came out in the 90s, when cartoons were very energized. And a lot of the other shorts have tons of energy that end up making them tiring. This one is just a nice, quiet, good time. Strangely enough, by not trying to stand out, you stand out the most of all. In a series of unique shorts, I do think this is one of the most unique ones of them all.
Oh yeah, cartoons!
This is another one that has quite the title. The first question on everyone's mind is, what in earth and all of history is Fathead? And the answer is, something that should have been a show, or at least an Oh Yeah Cartoons miniseries, I tell you. This is one that's a lot more in line with the typical 90s cartoon, in so much that I could see this airing next to something like Recess or Angry Beavers. Fathead is a cave kid, and in this episode he must prove that he's a man by going to steal a T-Rex egg. His little sister tells him that he should basically fake the task, or else he'll risk being eaten, and that's genuinely a good dilemma. It's a good conflict, with a unique coat of paint, and all of the characters here are extremely memorable. Like, I could see this kind of thing happening for episode after episode. I would definitely watch that. And to tell you the truth, it kind of pissed me off that the closest thing we got to this concept being realized was Tak and the Power of Juju, which was not a good show. I mean, come to think of it, have we ever really gotten a good caveman-themed cartoon that, wasn't the Flintstones, which almost doesn't count as a caveman cartoon? One more thing that I really love about the short is that all the adults adults are basically devolved, like obviously stupid, and act like Neanderthals while the kids act like, well, humans. I like this because that was standard in the 90s in shows like The Simpsons or Rugrats or whatever, where the adults were so incredibly stupid. It's nice seeing someone else notice that and actually make it make sense in their own world. Another fun fact, this is one of the only 2 episodes of Oh Yeah Cartoons that was 11 minutes. And they really did manage to use that extra time well. It's obviously not perfect, but it's a premise that I want to see more of, and that's the best thing that I can say about an episode of a miniseries like Oh Yeah Cartoons.
Oh Yeah Cartoons!
And if any of you have heard of an Oh Yeah Cartoon short before this video, it was probably Mina and the Count. There were several episodes of the series, and they all ranked really highly on my list. Although I think the first one here, The Ghouls Tribunal, is probably the best of them all. It stars a vampire known only as the Count, who has a friend in this innocent little girl named Mina, and they go through many adventures together. Some of it is typical stuff. The Count needs to go to the Mina's house for dinner and has to avoid the garlic. There's also stuff like reviving a frog Frankenstein style, and of course the Count needing to prove that he wasn't fraternizing with the humans in the first place, when some of the monsters start suspecting that Mina is a human. Mina is just like the most adorable character ever, and it's hard to not be melted by her cheerfulness and innocence. Most of the episodes of this series were for Oh Yeah Cartoons, although the actual pilot aired on the Cartoon Network equivalent What a Cartoon. And so that might have been one of the bigger reasons that this didn't get the full-on Fairly Odd Parents treatment. You know, getting its own show. To be honest with you, it's hard to say something negative about the show, except, like, one thing, and that's probably the other big reason that this wasn't given its own show, and why it's not even higher on this list. The Count is a grown adult, and Mina is not, and he's not related to her, and he's even explicitly mentioned to not be her teacher either. He's basically just a stranger. A friendship between a child and an adult when they're not related to is a hard sell, both back then and now. Even as someone who really likes these shorts, and I really do like these shorts, it's something that's hard to see past. A good counterpoint is The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Now, I actually like the character dynamics better in Mina and the Count, but in Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, this kind of stuff never really came up, even though not only is Grim, well, the entity of death, but also a grown adult, because we see that it's the kids who have made the terms of the deal. It really does spear any implications before they become a problem, and it's really unfortunate because the characters here are just extremely endearing. It's a cute, funny, sweet, and charming little world. It's another one made by Rob Renzetti, and his talent continues to show throughout all of this.
Oh yeah, cartoons.
So, Magicxie was a genuine surprise. It's about a girl named Trixie who gets into magic and sees a stage magician at a circus, where she constantly upstages him. It's not the most complicated of premises, obviously, but everything that they do with it is just honestly inspiring. And they do everything. This is a short that does every single thing possible with its premise. And it does it with very little dialogue, and it's a premise that has a lot of potential. Like I said about Herb, I love it when one character tries to go after another one, but the other character is so completely oblivious to what they're trying to do, because the villain is just so inept at it. The jokes just keep coming with this one. It's probably the most joke-dense short in the entire Oh Yeah Cartoons anthology, and the visuals just keep coming. Like, a lot of this stuff could only be done with animation, and that is certainly something special. Everything from escaping strange perspectives to thinking with portals. There's a lot that you can do with animation in general, and the premise of a magic show lets you go extraordinarily far with it. The actual magician Magma makes quite the nice foil. In several minutes, it shows you how arrogant he is and how much of a sham he is, and so it makes it really fun to watch him get upstaged by this little girl, who has natural talent.
Oh yeah, cartoons, huh?
And for number 1, in a series that was full of genuine surprises, both good and bad, nothing surprised me more than Protecto 5000. While other episodes tried to make me laugh or endear me with interesting characters or visuals, Protecto 5000 was the only one that tried to make me feel, and it succeeded. The Protecto 5000 is a robot who is designated to protect a smaller robot, or a scientist. He failed and the US government decided to nuke Bikini Bottom because Season 6 was going down the tubes. And so now he decides to work as a school janitor. Yes, school janitors were a theme in Oh Yeah Cartoons for reasons that I don't understand. Then we come across a young girl who has difficulties making friends because her parents are always moving. And there are also bullies which continually torment her throughout the day. Of course, the Protecto 5000 ends up helping her when she gets thrown into a locker, and they hit it off with a friendship that I must admit does work a lot better than Mina and the Count, for reasons that I mentioned in that segment. I won't spoil the climax of this one, but if you've ever watched The Iron Giant, this one gives off a lot of the same emotions. Protecto 5000 is definitely the most heartfelt of the whole lot, and even if it never got more than this one episode, I'm really glad that this one was made. It's probably one I'm going to watch many times to come. Hell, probably all of these on this list many times to come. But that being said, I don't know if that's what you want to hear from me. Maybe you want to hear about the other side of where unbridled creativity can lead us. You probably want to know about the worst of them, the worst of Oh Yeah cartoons. And I am here to deliver. Next time. Hopefully soon, but next time, we will be covering the top 10 worst of the Oh Yeah cartoon shorts, so we can see the whole spectrum of this strange and wonderful anthology series. Heads up though, some of the worst stuff of Oh Yeah cartoons is actually some of the worst things that have ever been in a Nicktoon before. Hey, you've reached the end of the video. The names scrolling by right now are of all the wonderful patrons who donated to help keep this channel alive. If you'd like your name in the credits, head on over and make a donation yourself. Also, be sure to check out my Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for exclusive content and previews of my upcoming videos. I've also got a forum where you can discuss anything that has to do with my content and connect with the rest of the community. To find anything that I mentioned, just visit my link tree in the description down below. Lastly, be sure to subscribe, comment, and share this video with your friends. Oh, and thanks for watching.